This podcast is sponsored by Calvary Healing Center, providing quality addiction treatment since 1964. Calvary's full continuum of care works to heal the entire individual, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. They work with patients and families to regain control of their lives and bring long-lasting sobriety that extends beyond their care. Their compassionate team is here to help. If you or somebody you know is interested in learning more, please visit www.calvarycenter.com. Hey everyone, it's Brandon Lee with another episode of Escaping Rock Bottom, the podcast. Man, I am so pumped to have this guest on today. His story is so motivational, and he's a killer speaker. He's got a great story. He's also got a lot of experience with different treatment programs, opiate use, pain pills, which eventually led to meth and heroin and IV use. He's a Valley native, and I'm super excited to have Sean on the podcast. Man, thanks for sharing your story today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Yeah, I always say this too. My life's mission is to break the stigma around mental health, and I truly believe the only way we get to that point, the only place we get to that point of actually breaking the stigma around mental health is by people like you and myself speaking up publicly about our own struggles, but also sharing how amazing our lives are today.
Absolutely.
So take me a little bit back to the childhood days of Sean growing up. What was it like for you and your family household? What was it like for you as a child growing up?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I am born and raised Phoenix native. And I think that just going through my history and looking back, I don't see any like part of my, formative years that like made me the way I am as far as, my addiction. I grew up in a stable home. My father was actually a police officer. My mom was a 911 operator, strong Christian faith. I knew right from wrong. So there was nothing there, that, no kind of like, traumatic like episode or anything that I can draw back to that kicked this off, but more so just like an inherent kind of feeling I had of like a lonesomeness or like a feeling apart from other people, I guess you could say. I feel like I struggled somewhat with social skills and had some issues like connecting with people, and I was very emotional and very, just very sensitive, and as far back as I can remember, I just always was a dreamer, and I was always just in this mindset of, I loved reading, I loved books, shows, video games, and I always would kind of like project myself into those pieces of entertainment to where, I was the hero of the story and I was doing something big and I had these grand aspirations, and so I don't know exactly where, those feelings come from. I think that if you walked up to anybody on the street, regardless if they're an addict or not, and you asked them, how they felt when they were a kid, I'm sure a lot of people would say they had some weirdness as far as like, I didn't always feel like I was a part of something, but that just felt magnified in me. I just felt, kind of like an inherent less than. So yeah, when I was young, it was always the projection with the entertainment and the reading and the shows and movies and things like that. And, as I got older, I got into music and I was just very much into that scene. And with that, came some marijuana use, some alcohol use. And, while I enjoyed those things, it wasn't really any type of wow moment, when I tried alcohol or marijuana. It was fun, and I partied with my friends, and that certainly contributed to that feeling of being a part of something and helped alleviate some of those feelings. But it wasn't until I tried opiates, that I really had an experience that just changed my life completely. I remember I was prescribed a prescription for Percocet or oxycodone when I got my wisdom teeth out. And I don't even think I took the pills after I had that procedure. I think my mom was kind of wary of giving those to me. I was probably 16, 17 years old. And she put them on a shelf and we kept them, And I remember, kind of as I was getting into this little rebellious phase in high school or middle school or what have you of, I was a rocker or punk rock and all that stuff. And the marijuana and the alcohol, I had heard that you could take these pills and you could get high or you could, have a good time or whatever. So I just felt compelled one day. I went to that medicine cabinet. I grabbed that bottle. I popped a pill out and I took it. And that was the first spiritual experience I feel like I ever had in my life, because when the effect of that substance took hold of my body, all of those feelings of that apart from other people, that struggle with anxiety, that struggle with not feeling like I was a part of something. That was all gone. That was completely alleviated by that substance. And I remember from that very first moment of when I felt the intoxication from that substance, in my mind, it was like a flip got switched. And I was just like, I'm going to do this every day of my life. I don't know how people don't do this, because I wasn't dealing well with reality. I wasn't dealing well with those complicated feelings we feel like in our adolescence and all the hormones and everything. And I think that it was just that perfect moment of just being exposed to that. And that felt like my solution. That felt like that's what I needed.
It's fascinating you go there, because my first real drug use was at age 15, and I did lines of cocaine in Laguna Beach. People would sit there and go, man, you grew up in Orange County, California. You grew up in a wealthy part of the country. You went to all boys private Catholic prep school. You were playing on the best club soccer teams. Like, why you, Brandon, at age 15 turned to cocaine and sex? And to me, I was molested repeatedly as a child. So for me to be sexualized so young, it's really no shocker that at age 15, I became sexualized. It's no real shocker that I would choose cocaine. But when I did that first line of cocaine, man, it was that powerfulness, right?
Yeah.
I felt that numb, that tingly feel. And it just made me feel warm and fuzzy.
Yeah.
And I knew I was a gay kid, and I felt always out of sorts. I never felt like I actually fit in with the cool kids in junior high school and in high school. But the only time I ever felt part of was after I did a line of cocaine.
Yeah.
And suddenly they accepted me. Suddenly they were talking to me.
Yep.
They were inviting me to go hang out with them at their beach houses
Yeah.
and do those things. So just that feeling of this is a hell of a lot better than when I'm not high. So I'm just going to continue to stay high or continue to chase that high.
Absolutely. 100%, same experience. I think a lot of us have that. It's, that's an instant social circle when it comes to the partying and the party drugs like cocaine and other, stimulants and alcohol, marijuana, things like that. Same experience. I remember it was instantly, I felt accepted. I felt like people liked me because they always knew that I had, something that they wanted. Little did I know it had nothing to do with me. But yeah, I remember that was my niche. That was the peg that I fit into. I was the party guy and I was fun loving, and all of a sudden I could talk to girls. I could, I wasn't anxious about those things. And it just felt like a breath of fresh air. From going from a place of just having that just constant tension of just feeling like I wasn't comfortable in my skin to just feeling like I can take a breath. I could just be, like probably a lot of what they talk about nowadays with like mindfulness and just presence. I felt that presence or that experience through those substances.
I totally get and understand why people choose to numb themselves. I totally get it. Whether it's some sort of a traumatic experience, what I tell people all the time, I believe that trauma, untreated trauma, is the gateway
Absolutely.
to hardcore drug use.
Absolutely.
Just untreated trauma is really the gateway. And if we really want to solve the drug problem in this country, we have got to have better mental health services provided, whether it's therapy, psychiatrists out there, to really see those troubling signs of kids. But what I also don't want people to do is compare traumas.
Sure.
Because what may be traumatic to me may not be traumatic to you. And yes, I was repeatedly molested as a child, and that is an awful experience. So it's no wonder why I chose drugs at such a young age to numb myself. But just even feeling like you're a loner or feeling like you're not part of, as a child, that in and of itself is a traumatic experience.
Absolutely.
Going to junior high school when you don't have a lot of friends, that is traumatic for a lot of children. And when you feel that way, you don't want to feel that way. That's like natural human instinct.
Yes.
I'm in pain. I don't like
Don't
pain.
want it. Yeah.
How do I get this pain? How do I rid myself of this pain? That's when a lot of people start to numb themselves with booze and hardcore drugs. So tell me a little bit about how you got introduced to opiates. I remember you saying that you went into your medicine cabinet because your mom had some leftovers.
Yeah.
Here's a life lesson. If you're a parent listening to this podcast right now and you went into surgery or you had a doctor prescribe some opiates to you and you didn't use them all, the last thing you ever want to do is to put that prescription pill into a medicine cabinet. What do? You take it and you flush them down the toilet.
Get rid of it.
Because if you have a child or you have a friend who goes into your bathroom, they open up the medicine cabinet, which a lot of people do.
Yep.
And they just check to see, I wonder if they have any of those little pain pills.
Yeah.
And that's how you got your hands on them.
That's how I got my hands on them. Yeah, that was the introduction for me. And I think those types of drugs were very accessible at the time. I know that was really when OxyContin was booming, which they don't manufacture that specific drug anymore. But it was really popping up. And I think that a lot of people my age, I'm 33 now, around those kind of like formative high school years with that generation, those pills were around. They were everywhere. And I think they were in everybody's medicine cabinet. I mean, they were handing them out for just about every small little ailment that you could possibly think of at the doctor's office. So it was very common for people to have those in their medicine cabinet. And that was my supply for some time. Anybody's house I was at, I would look in their medicine cabinet to see if those
people
were there.
need to understand that. That's why I tell people all the time, I'm like, the good addicts.
Yeah.
The good addicts, when we're invited over, and this is just the God's honest truth, because we speak real truth to reality on this podcast.
Absolutely.
The reality is this. If you think you're saving those opiates for yourself, being like, okay, in case I have a bad day down the road, just know you are one step closer to introducing yourself to a drug called heroin.
Yes.
And just know that when people come over to your house, people look in your medicine cabinet, just FYI.
Yeah, they do. Unfortunately, they do. Yeah, and that was the reality for me, and that led me to a place where I was using heroin. And I think for a few years, I was into this kind of whole, like I had said, I had that first experience and I just dove right in. I was all about pills. I was all about getting them and trading them, middleman. I wouldn't say I was ever like a dealer, but I definitely, was always trying to procure those. And I was always trying to have a supply of those and had a lot of different experiences through that time. But got to a place where those pills, they weren't manufacturing those types of pills anymore, OxyContin specifically. And then they were harder to come by and expensive. And right around the same time, heroin started booming. Heroin was cheaper. It got you more intoxicated than the pills did. And for a lot of us in that position, it was the natural progression. That's what led me to that. Around the same time, I know Brandon mentioned before, but I started experimenting with stimulant-based medications, pills, and the same exact thing. Led me straight to the street version of that, crystal meth. And
what I want to tell people, too, is that a few years back, I did an investigative piece on needle exchange programs here in the Valley, and I had a chance to actually talk and interview 100 opiate users and heroin users who were at this needle exchange, picking up a tourniquet, their cooking plate, their Narcan, and their syringes, their needles. And 100% of the folks that I spoke to that night, I asked them this one question. How on earth did you end up here in your life in a vacant parking lot in the East Valley looking for a tourniquet, looking for a cooking plate, looking for Narcan, and looking for needles? Every single person told me it all started with a prescription of pain pills.
Absolutely.
And when that prescription ran out, they chose heroin.
Yeah.
Because eventually the doctor said, I'm not going to give you anymore.
Correct.
Well, okay, now I'm hooked and I'm just going to buy heroin, and inject heroin into my body. So when we talk about a gateway drug to heroin, the gateway drug is prescription pain pills.
Absolutely.
You take away the prescription pain pills, you don't just jump to heroin. I try to convince people that, listen, like, drug user Sally over here isn't going to one day wake up and say, hey, I'm going to try heroin today. No, it all begins with opiates. Correct. And how it hits on our receptor cells in our brains and the lock that has. Yes. And when you take away those pills, well, I need that fix. And the only thing that's going to bring you that same fix is heroin.
Correct.
Take you to that next level.
Yeah, agreed. 100%. That was the gateway for me. That's what led me to that place. Like I said, cheaper, more readily available. It was the natural progression. Yeah.
How hard is it? Because I was never a slammer. I never used needles. I always smoked meth. Yeah. And that was my way of intaking that drug. So I have no experience in slamming, street drug term for people who use IVs. IV use, drug use. What was it like? I've heard because I have been offered. I was hanging out with this group of guys. We were all doing meth. I was the only one who wasn't slamming. And this one guy said, "Hey, do you want to try it?" And I said, yes. Even though for so many years I had this higher power, guardian angel, every time it was offered to me, Brandon, say no. Brandon, say no. So I always said no. I said yes this one night. And there was another guy there, and he goes, "Wait a second, have you ever slammed before?" And I said no. And this drug addict goes, "You're not doing it." And I was like, "Why?" Like, I want to. And he goes, "No, I'm not letting you do this. I'm not going to be here for your first time slamming." Because he knew that once you slam, the chances of you recovering are so much slimmer.
It's just that next level.
Tell me, why is that?
I'd like to say...
Or just describe that feeling of it's another level.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So, I mean, when you're talking about heroin, pills, or any kind of drug, really, when you go from like an oral method of ingestion to like a straight into your bloodstream, I mean, the difference is it's crazy, you know? So... for me, you know, it's like you said, I never woke up one day and was like, I'm going to shoot heroin today. It wasn't really like that. It was more so I was in a position where, you know, I'd gotten into, been introduced to heroin after, you know, all these years with pills, was smoking the heroin. But just like any other, you know, drug, my tolerance, my tolerance, I guess, if you will, you know, for that drug increased, you know, every week, every day, almost probably, to where, you know, one day you take one pill, the next day you need two to get the same effect. So for me, I was around some people and they were using IV heroin, and they asked me if I want to do it. And unfortunately, there wasn't a person in that situation, that guardian angel guy that you had there. I wish there would have been, but there wasn't somebody there like that, and there was no pause for me. You know, as much as I wish there would have been, I think that really just drives home, you know, in retrospect, looking back, just how much, like, to my core, you know, I'm a drug addict. I just am. There was no voice in my head that might have been like, you shouldn't do this. It was like, oh, I can get that drug in my system faster and feel it even more. Let's do it.
And here's the thing that I want people to also understand. The mind of a drug addict is at that point, you're not thinking rationally.
No.
And your brain at that point has been hijacked. And that's the one message I love to get home to people who are not addicts but have an addict in their life, is that a non-addict's going to sit there and go, why would you ever do that? Like, why would you do that if you know it's going to do blah, 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 blah. What I tell people too, that pause button, once your brain gets hijacked, there is no pause.
There's nothing.
Like for an addict. Like once it's hijacked, you're off to the races. It's trying to get to that addict before their brain gets hijacked to that point. But take me back to that rock bottom, because you have a pretty powerful moment that happened at a hospital.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this was December 2014. You know, over the years, I had been in and out of different, you know, halfway houses, sober livings. I had done a couple stays at like detoxes, a couple psych wards, things like that, a couple different treatment programs even at that point, but never really was I in a position at those places where I had started that process. It was more like something that my family wanted me to do, or I had nowhere else to go, or it just wasn't intrinsically motivated. So I got to a point where December 14, you know, my parents, they had cut me off. They were done enabling me. They had had enough of my BS. They had gone through hell and back with me. All of my family members, my brother, my friends, my family. I had no resources to speak of. You know, I had just gotten kicked out of another halfway house for relapsing for the however many time I had. And I was in bad shape. You know, I was in a position where I was very sick physically and mentally. So I was basically on the street. I was couch surfing. I had nowhere to go. I was staying on drug dealers' couches and staying at tweaker pads and things like that. And I started having this terrible cough and these symptoms. So in a moment of, you know, reason that I had, I went to Banner University, or Banner Good Sam as it was then. And it turned out, just due to the way that I was living my life and with the IV drug use and not practicing safe IV drug use, I had hepatitis C. So I had liver disease. I also had double pneumonia from all the smoking drugs and shooting drugs and just the dirty, you know, kind of way I was living. I was in bad shape. So I remember, they're like, okay, we're going to admit you to the hospital because you're all, we got to do antibiotics, all this different stuff. So they admit me to the hospital, and, of course I told them I was in pain and I was having these issues. So they're giving me some pain medication and things like that. And I remember sitting in that hospital, and, they were bringing me food. I was in a semi-comfortable bed. They were giving me some pills. And I thought to myself, like, how sad is it that this is where my life takes me, and yet this is where I find comfort. Like, I'm comfortable with this. I'm in a place, it's Christmas. I'm by myself in a hospital, no friends, no family. Family's done with me, and I didn't care. My level of apathy was just through the roof for my own life and the lives of the people around me. So as I'm sitting there, I'm kind of thinking these thoughts, and I'm troubled by this in a moment, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to call my dad. I'm going to reach out to my dad. I haven't spoken to him in a while, and I want to talk to him. I want to see if maybe they'll come down here. Maybe they'll come see me, and it is the holiday, and it's been forever, and I'm their son. So I call my dad, and I'm like, I tell him the situation. I'm like, I'm over here. I'm downtown. I'm in the hospital. I'm pretty sick. I was just wondering if you guys want to stop by, and say hi. Maybe we could visit for a little bit, because this is, a miserable situation. I'm here all by myself. And I remember my dad, just without like a second's thought, he's like, let me talk to a nurse first, or see if you can get some staff to talk to me. So I called the nurse in or whatever, and I got the info for him to call the nurse's station. So I hang up with them, and he calls the nurse's station, and the nurse comes in after that, and she's like, your dad wanted me to tell you that he can't come see you. So I didn't know this at the time, but basically what had happened was, my dad called over there. He talked to the nurse, and he says, is my son going to die tonight? Is he in such bad shape that he's going to die? Like in this moment, basically. And the nurse is like, well, he's in pretty bad shape, but no, he's not going to die right now. And my dad says, well, then tell him I can't come see him.
Wow.
Yeah. And that struck me, in that moment, just having that experience of the only way that my father, is going to come and see me at Christmas, at the lowest point of my entire life, is if I'm going to die in that moment. Other than that, his boundary was so steadfast that he had so much of my stuff up until that point that he stuck with that. And that gave me pause. And that gave me, that moment, God gave me really in that moment, clarity. Like that moment of clarity that maybe my life isn't about me. And I could see for a moment, in that moment of that pain, of feeling how much that hurt, I could see how much that I was affecting the people around me. And I could see that, because addicts, we love to say, I'm just hurting myself. That's total BS. I mean, that you were destroying the lives of everyone around you in society. You're not contributing. I love to say that. And I saw that in that moment, that maybe it's not all about me. Maybe my focus needs to be on something else other than me, because my way is obviously not working.
And what I love here is that your parents learned what enabling behavior was over the years with you, because they did enable you for years.
Yes.
And then eventually your parents learned what enabling behavior was.
Yeah.
And what your dad did when he called that nurse, he saved your life. And I know that that's really hard for an addict in that position. You feel rejected. My family won't. You pity is me, right? Pity party.
Yeah.
Woe is me. My parents won't come and visit me. I'm in the hospital. No, what your dad did, your dad saved your life. Because how many months after that did you get sober?
I think it was actually a matter of weeks after that. It was even maybe less than a month that I found myself in a position where I was willing to accept help, and I reached out and got some help.
Because had your dad showed up to the hospital that day, maybe he would have seen you, gotten a weak moment.
Yeah.
Taken you home from the hospital,
Yep.
put you back in their house.
Yep.
Without any consequences, because he saw you at that fragile state. And
Exactly.
the hardest bond to break is that parent-child bond. Your dad probably couldn't see you in that hospital that day because he knew he would have been too weak to see his son in such bad shape. He wouldn't have been able to say no looking in your eyes.
I bet that was a huge part of it.
I guarantee it. It was easier for him to break up with you with the nurse than it is to tell your son. He didn't tell you directly on that phone call.
No.
He got on the phone with the nurse.
Correct.
Probably because he knew it would be too hard to tell his son on the phone, I'm not coming to see you. because
And
you're
he
not
knew
dead.
he knew how I'd act too.
Yeah.
He knew what my response would be.
100%.
Yeah.
You would have, the master manipulator
Correct.
we are in our disease. We can put on a really good act
Absolutely.
to get people to feel pity for us, to get what we want out of them.
Yes.
And what you wanted out of them was love and attention.
Correct.
In that moment. Tell me about your experience at Calvary Healing Center. When you decided to go to treatment over at Calvary. What was that like?
Sure.
And why was that different from other treatment centers? Because what I want people to know is that Calvary Healing Center has a phenomenal reputation within the treatment industry. They just do. They've got a great efficacy rate. People speak highly of that program. You have a lot of experience in and out of different kind of treatment centers and detoxes and mental institutions. What was different about Calvary for you?
Yeah. So for me, I think that Calvary, just more so than a lot of the experiences that I've had, and don't get me wrong, there's so many great places, but I think for me, it was the personal touch. And I think that being as it is that almost everybody who works at Calvary is in recovery. They get it, which is the same at a lot of places. But they got me, They were able to help me, I guess, kind of like see my situation with a new perspective in that not only that, but just seeing people in recovery who work there and how much they loved on me and how much they gave me that attention and gave me that love when I couldn't love myself. Had a lasting effect on me. That, and I saw people who were happy. I saw people smiling. I saw people with a twinkle in their eyes who used to be just like me, who were doing drugs and who were drinking excessively and doing all these crazy things, but they had recovered. And not only had they recovered, but they had 100% put themselves into a position to help other people. And I really felt that love at Calvary. They gave me a lot of practical tools on like how to cope with a lot of those early recovery type things. Like the early recovery for me was like cravings. Like, how do I deal with this nagging sense of I've got to get intoxicated, I've got to get high, whatever. And coming from somebody who, like I said, who had a twinkle in their eye, who was smiling, who had been through that same experience, who had qualifications for that in the sense of like a therapist or a clinician, they were able to show me practical ways to deal with those things, to be mindful, to be present, to have that safe space, to kind of learn some of the ins and outs of the disease of addiction, to really see it as a disease, especially that, and a sickness, as opposed to some kind of personal moral failing that, for so many years, I think a lot of people had, which I think to some degree I had, and they really, really were able to kind of give me that perspective, to really see that, I'm a sick person. To see that people can not only be free in recovery, but they can live happy and fulfilling lives. They could smile, the community, the introduction to 12-step, all the different education they gave me on, just like I had said, practical coping skills, methods, things like that.
And what I truly I love about the treatment industry, and especially the folks over at Calvary, is they get you because they've been you.
Yep.
They get you because they've been you. They've walked in your shoes. I will never forget, because you had your spiritual awakening at a hospital, as did I. I overdosed on meth and GHB, cracked my head open, bleeding in the brain. I'm sitting there in the emergency room, just out of a coma, and the chief neurosurgeon was paged from his home to come do brain surgery on me. I'm like, hell no, you're not doing brain surgery on me. Unplug myself from the machines, walk down Hollywood Boulevard, find my truck, get in my truck, get high on meth and GHB again, wake up in the same ER a week later in a coma, the same team of doctors around me. And finally, I'm sitting in this isolation room. This nurse comes over to me. I'm crying, thinking that nobody is hearing me. She comes over and she asks me, do you want to call your family? And I said, I don't have any family, which I lied, because I didn't want my dad or my mom to come to the hospital and see me in that condition. Because had they seen me in that condition, 2 hospital stays in 2 weeks, 2 comas, I would have been exposed for what I truly was, a freaking drug addict, out of control. And I didn't want them to see me that way. So if nobody ever saw me, then I could keep it a secret. I was still trying to hold on to that double life. The nurse holds my hand and she goes, do you believe in God? And I said, absolutely not. I do not believe in God. And she goes, that's okay, because God still believes in you.
Amen.
Here is $10. Promise me this, when you get discharged today, that you will go to this church. They have an AA meeting tonight. And I did. I've been sober ever since. Before I went to that meeting, I had to go to the mental health ward. And I'm sitting there talking to this guy. And he goes, why are you so angry? And I said, I'm not angry. Why are you so angry? I'm not angry. He asked me again. I said, dude, man, you asked me one more time, why are you so angry? I'm going to get angry. But every one of my friends is like, I'll be there for them. I'll do anything for my friends. He goes, Brandon, stop. You have been bug chasing. You have been trying to get HIV over the past year. You have been putting meth into your system, GHB into your system. You're having sex with all these strangers. Brandon, someone who loves himself, someone who is happy, would not do the things you are doing to yourself.
Absolutely.
This guy was not a psychiatrist. He was not a doctor. You know what this guy was? He's a former meth user with 15 years of experience who saw him in me. He cut through my bullshit.
Yeah.
And he got right into me. And that man cut me in a matter of 15 minutes the way no therapist had ever been able to cut into me. Why? Because he had walked in my shoes.
Because he knew.
He knew. It's the same reason why the people at Calvary, right, will be able to look at another addict and say,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I used to be you.
Yeah, we
know the tricks.
Yeah,
we know the manipulation. We know the behaviors.
Absolutely.
Let's cut the bullshit out.
Yeah,
it's time to get real.
Yeah, we probably know you better than you know yourself.
Absolutely.
At this point. Yeah,
so it's really beautiful, and especially because you have that experience of other treatment centers. Because how much time do you have now in recovery?
Yeah, December 2014 is when I went into Calvary for that last time. So,
yeah, well, congratulations, because I need people to understand this. The amount of time that you have in sobriety right now from IV drug use is a damn miracle. But what I want people to understand is it can happen.
Absolutely.
It can happen. You got to choose the right treatment center. Got to surround yourself with people who know what the hell they're doing and that love and the compassion. But also, who's going to work with your family? Because how important is it to your recovery that your family understood enabling behavior? And having the family part of your recovery, because I know that that's something Calvary does. Yeah,
it was vital. I'd say that, like you had mentioned before, it was only a matter of weeks, I think, before that final moment I had in that hospital with the combination of that experience, which I was allowed to have by my parents' boundary setting. So we encourage that strongly. That is a huge part of treatment, and I think if family's on board and if family can be involved in learning about the disease and learning how to set boundaries, that could save somebody's life. My parents got involved with PALS, Parents of Addicted Loved Ones. That's a free group here in the Valley. Actually, they're nationwide now, but there, they found that support of parents who were going through the same thing they were. They found practical skills, kind of like I did at Calvary, on how to set boundaries, and not only that, but how to hold it. How to have that support network of people you can lean on so that when you want to give in and when you want to throw out the life preserver, you don't, because that might be you might be robbing them of having the experience they need to have. So I know that a lot of the time, we talk to a lot of family members at Calvary. I worked in intake for a long time, and I spoke with a lot of family members on the phone, and our natural instinct, I think, is to reach in and to rescue and to pull people out of these situations. But what we try to drive home, or what I've heard people say in some of these meetings, is, what would you do if you thought it was going to save somebody's life? And if that meant setting a boundary, if that meant not paying their phone bill, not paying their rent, not allowing them to live in your house and use drugs, would you do that if you thought it would save your life? And that, sometimes that's what we need, is to drive those points home. So PALS was great for that. There's Al-Anon. There's all kinds of groups in education, therapeutic processes that family members can do. A lot of free resources too, which is why I like PAL, where you can learn. So I would say, I don't know the exact statistics, but I know when there is that family involvement, I know the chances are better. I know that's what works.
As we begin to close here, and it's such a powerful podcast episode because your story is so powerful. We're in a pandemic right now, and there's been a lot of relapse, and there just has. And if you have relapse and you're listening to this podcast, please listen to me. It's okay.
Totally.
It's okay. It's been a hell of a year, and this is a disease And I am so sick and tired of people holding a different standard to people with mental health and suffering from mental health than we do with other people with diseases. There are other diseases out there where people bring you flowers and they check in on you. But for some reason, when it comes to addiction, man, this disease, it's like, oh, you messed up, start back on day one. Oh, you messed up, you're a loser. Oh, you messed up, you're weak. No.
Yeah.
If you relapsed, it's okay, man. Just reach out. Let's get you back on the wagon. Let's get you back on the highway to the road to recovery. Mm-hmm. You can hop right back on.
100%.
You don't lose that experience that you had up until that relapse.
Absolutely.
That experience you get to keep with you for the rest of your life. You know, that being said, we are in a pandemic. There is a lot of isolation. There aren't a lot of meetings that are happening in person. Everything's happening virtually and via Zoom. My love language is touch, so it's really impacted me.
Yeah.
I like to be around people. I like to give people a hug. That's my love language, not Zoom.
Yeah.
That being said, it's the reality of what we're living with.
Sure.
What's that last piece of advice that you could give to somebody out there who may be struggling right now, who may be just sitting there going, man, I feel hopeless. I feel down. I feel depressed. I feel anxious. What's your message to them right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So to anybody who's going through it right now, and I think a lot of people are, you know, like you said, this has been a hell of a year. There's all kinds of stressors happening around the normal stressors that we experience, you know, whether it's the anxiety, depression, poor motivation, substance abuse. If you're struggling, I see you. I feel for you. I hear you, kind of like what Brandon was saying. Our message is love, man. It's got to be compassion. That's got to be the movement, because there's so much. I know for me, and probably for you too, I felt so much shame. For so many years, I felt so ashamed. I felt so stupid and so less than. And I just want you to know, if you're listening and you're going through that, you're not. You are no less of a person than anyone else. You're struggling with a mental health issue. That's what it is. It's a disease. It's not a personal moral failing. It's not any kind of problem with your character. The way we combat that's with connection. It's with sharing. And I know it's hard, because we're in this where it's like, oh, you know, we're supposed to stay home and socially distance. And I get that. And we got to be responsible. But I'm the same way. I like to be out and about. But there's so many things we can do. We can stay in touch with trusted friends, family. We could participate in 12-step on Zoom. I do 12-step. I love 12-step. I get a lot out of that. You could be involved with your church. You could be involved with, you know, Celebrate Recovery, and even taking it smaller than that, just in your interactions on a daily basis. Just try to bring one positive thing, whether that's, you know, waving to your neighbor or helping somebody out who's struggling. I think so much so, I just believe that the remedy to these issues and the remedy to so many things that we struggle with in the human condition is just getting out of ourselves, is just putting ourselves in a position to where we can be helpful to other people, to where we can get out of our crazy heads and just into, you know what, enough about me. What about you? You know, what can I do for you?
I love that. And thank you for being so public and coming on the podcast and putting a face to addiction, because it really does help people. The whole purpose is the reason why I started this podcast was the reason to break my anonymity, to let people out there know that the news anchor you trust and tune into at night to keep you updated on what's happening here in the Valley or in the world is the same guy that used to be a hardcore meth user on the slums and the streets of Los Angeles. Like, that used to be me, but judge me by the man I am today and the life I built today, not by the man I was before. And the only way we can remove the stigma around mental health is for people like Sean to step forward and share his story, to share what it was like in his active disease, but to also show you what his life is like for him now. It's important for people like me to continue to talk openly and publicly about my own mental health struggles, just so it makes it just a little bit easier for the person at home who thinks that they're unique and they're suffering alone in silence, like nobody gets them. No. Sean and myself, we get you.
Absolutely.
We understand the pain, the loneliness, the anxiety, the depression that you're going through. You're not alone in this. And I just know that my higher power did not save me from death umpteen amount of times so that I can make a ton of money and live my own selfish life. No, my higher power kept me alive so that I can help save another person from whatever it is they're suffering from. That's the only reason why I'm here. It's the only reason why I have this podcast. It's nothing else. My higher power kept me here for a greater purpose than serving myself.
Absolutely.
So if you are suffering right now in this pandemic, you're not alone. I know how hard it is to pick up that phone and ask for help. It feels like a 50-pound dumbbell. But the more we do it, the easier it gets.
Yep.
So share this podcast, Sean. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thanks
Absolutely.
for being so open and speaking so publicly.
Yeah.
And thank you for watching this episode of Escaping Rock Bottom.
Right on.
This podcast is sponsored by Calvary Healing Center, providing quality addiction treatment since 1964. Calvary's full continuum of care works to heal the entire individual, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. They work with patients and families to regain control of their lives and bring long-lasting sobriety that extends beyond their care. Their compassionate team is here to help. If you or somebody you know is interested in learning more, please visit www.calvarycenter.com.